Okay, so you then came back and you joined this company, Chas T. Main.
Correct. We called it Charles. It was spelled C-H-A-S, but Chas T. Main, we usually called it Main just for short. Right. We had about 2,000 employees in Boston. It was what's called a closely held corporation, which means basically a partnership. About 5% of these 2,000 employees owned the company. They were what we call partners. And I became one of those eventually. I became chief economist of that firm, and I ended up having roughly 50 people working for me over time.
And what type of work does that company do?
Well, interesting. The company called itself an engineering construction firm, and we never did any real construction. We never owned any equipment. And in fact, we prided ourselves on saying we're objective. We don't need to go into countries and tell them to build big systems because we don't gain anything from it. We're not like Bechtel or Halliburton, Stone & Webster, any of the big construction companies. We don't do that. But the fact of the matter is, our job was to convince other countries to take these very large loans, and then to convince the World Bank and other such organizations to give these countries huge loans, let's say $1 billion, to Ecuador, to build big infrastructure projects, power plants and transmission lines and distribution systems, ports, highways, industrial parks, things that didn't benefit anybody except the very wealthy people in those countries, who were quite corrupt, and we corrupted them. So our job was to convince, let's say, Ecuador to accept $1 billion loan, convince the World Bank to give Ecuador $1 billion loan. 90% of that $1 billion would come back to the United States to pay for Halliburton, Bechtel, these kinds of, or these types of companies, to build the infrastructure, and then which would only serve the wealthiest people in those countries. And then the country would be stuck with this huge debt, which over time would continue to be refinanced and get larger and larger and larger, so that in fact today, Ecuador owes more than 50% of its national budget just to pay down its debt service, which means there's very little money left to go to pay for the education or health services for the poor people, who were the ones who suffered from these projects. It was their rivers that were destroyed as we built hydroelectric plants. It was their land that was destroyed, and while a few of their people got wealthy, as a few of ours did. And so now they're saddled with this incredible debt that they can't possibly pay. And so we go in and demand our pound of flesh, very much like the mafia. That's why we called ourselves hitmen. And so today, for example, this is actually what's happened in Ecuador. And today, we need Ecuador's oil. We need the oil from this Amazon area where these indigenous people live that I work with as a Peace Corps volunteer. And we tell Ecuador, since you can't pay off your loans, what you need to do is turn over your Amazon to our oil companies. And that's what they're doing. And the indigenous people there, the ones I work with now, have basically declared war. They said, we're not allowing these oil companies to come in. We're going to fight to the very last man if we have to. It's a terrible situation, and what it is all about is building empire. We've done this in every country around the world that has resources that we covet. Often this is oil in places like Indonesia, Nigeria, Ecuador, Venezuela, Colombia, so many different places. But sometimes it's other resources. For example, in Panama, it was the Panama Canal. And in this process, we've managed to create the largest empire in the history of the world, and we've done it largely without military might. It's been done primarily through economic hitmen like me. Now, when the economic hitmen fail, as we did in Panama with Omar Torrijos, and in Ecuador many years ago with Jaime Roldos when I was there, when we fail, the jackals are sent in. And these are CIA-sanctioned troublemakers. They will try to foment coups in a country. They'll try to overthrow the president. If they fail, if they're not able to do that, then they'll assassinate him. And Jaime Roldos of Panama, who was not overthrown, so he was assassinated. And Omar Torrijos, Jaime Roldos of Ecuador, Omar Torrijos of Panama, the same thing happened. We economic hitmen failed, the jackals went in and assassinated these presidents. It happened with Allende in Chile, Arbenz in Guatemala, and it's part of what Vietnam was about. And when the jackals fail and the economic hitmen both fail, as in Iraq, the final step is for us to send in our young men and women to die and to kill. And that's what we're doing in Iraq today.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
Okay, now, for the bailout. There's one person who is clearly the most responsible person for the mess we are in. Yes, we have idiots along the way, Barney Frank, Paulson, people who should know more than they know about finance and have no business being in the position that they're in. But the number one person, in fact, number one couple, even worse than Bill and Hillary, the number one couple that has destroyed our financial system is Phil and Wendy Graham. It started off in 1993. Wendy Graham, as chairwoman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, pushed through a key regulatory exemption just as she was about to leave office. 5 weeks later, she joined Enron's board of directors, where she served on the board's audit committee and had key financial information about the company. Okay, so then Phil Graham has to wait several years till 2000. And this is the key moment, December of 2000. So Phil Graham had to wait several years to become the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee. But once he did, he put his little plan into motion. He sponsored a bill called the Commodity Futures Modernization Act. This guy went to such lengths. He coordinated a tricky reintroducing of the bill with a different number, and he was able to pass the legislation without a full debate because of his position as chairman. Now, this bill not only set up Enron, Wendy, to do her scams, but it set up the entire financial craziness and speculation that we saw because of the removal of government safeguards and partitions. This is key. Warren Buffett called this bill financial weapons of mass destruction. We're talking about swaps. We're talking about derivatives. We're talking about all these terrible financial weapons of mass destruction. In 2001, with all her energy activity shielded, then Wendy was able to create these false electricity shortages in California for Enron. And Enron bilked California customers in particular out of an estimated $40 billion. So they're like a little tag team here. And then in 2002, Phil Graham goes to UBS Warburg. Okay, now UBS is the parent company, Union Bank of Switzerland, as in Swiss bank accounts. You know about Swiss bank accounts, right?